Pete Rizzo, you might know me as a Bitcoin historian on X, also doing a new Bitcoin podcast called Supply Shock over with the Blockworks folks, bit of a crypto general media, but you may recognize me from Bitcoin Magazine, CoinDesk, and some other places. Obviously, this panel is very interesting in light of this conference because what we're talking about here is making changes to Bitcoin, upgrading Bitcoin, and really this idea that at the base of Bitcoin, there's this ability to have a fork, right? People are making different software versions. They're running different software versions. And we have some interesting folks who I'm hoping can bring a different perspective to that about their responsibilities and how they think through that. So I guess over to the panel, if you could each introduce yourselves and then maybe give, both your personal and, kind of institutional view on just this idea. How do you think about this idea that Bitcoin has forks, could fork, is forking? Maybe we'll start with, let's see, Rob, Ryan, Rick.
I'm Ryan Rasmussen, the head of research at Bitwise, asset manager, been around since 2017. I think, we're not really on the development side of Bitcoin per se, but what we have been trying to do, especially with the launch of the Bitcoin ETFs, is take some of the profit that those products are generating and donate them back to open source developers and continue to support the ongoing development of Bitcoin. And so I'm here today. Oh, that's the easy work, in my opinion, just funneling the money and the capital. But, we're just here to help the ongoing longevity of the ecosystem. And so it's exciting to learn about everything on the roadmap and kind of try to be plugged in.
Cool. Rob, over to you. The question is, what do you do? And then what's your feelings on forks? How does it affect your company?
Yeah, my name's Rob Hamilton. I'm co-founder and CEO of Anchorwatch. We offer one-to-one insurance backed by Lloyd's of London. We're a Lloyd's of London cover holder for your Bitcoin held in cold storage. And we pair that insurance with our own custody technology infrastructure, leveraging more advanced Bitcoin native smart contracts. Miniscript, for those in the room, probably know a lot about it. And for us as an earlier stage company, it's this tough duality because there are a lot of features and things I would like to have, but I raised money to build a business on how Bitcoin exists today, right? And so there's a balance of I have aspirations and cool things I want to build, but I, as a small team, we're 6 full-time employees. I can't take a bunch of my dev time into going off on things that may never activate, right? So on that earlier side stage, it's just hard to just balance and juggling resources compared to active features of paying customers and new features we can do within Bitcoin consensus today. And that's kind of what we've built is within Bitcoin consensus, how far can we take the custody model? And in the world of forks, though, I think it's just an interesting place. My thesis, at least, is as these things start getting clarity and getting ready to activate, as a small, nimble team, we'll be able to leverage those primitives very quickly and being able to kind of offer that better end customer security and service. Because I think a lot of the conversation around today, the last talk, especially, but just in general, having better security and being able to add functionality to Bitcoin abstracts a lot of human operations, and you put them into a couple bytes on chain, and you're able to offer orders of magnitude better security with less risk and trade-offs. And since we're in the insurance business on our side, like that's meaningful for being able to make it more affordable.
Rick, over to you. Question, how do you think through the forks, and tell us a little bit about your work over at Coinbase?
Sure. Hi, again, Rick Schonberg. I help run Coinbase custody. It's, again, very interesting to be here and sort of hear what's going on at the lower level. On our side, we obviously, as a large custodian, have to look at our clients and see what they're doing, see what this community is doing, and be prepared. And sort of, Darwin at this point will take charge. Whatever you all do to grow the network is success. So we need to be there to support it. So if the industry says fork and they go a direction, we have to be there to support it. But for us, it's the one thing to draw out. Being a large custodian, being regulated, having SOC audits and everything else like that, moving thoughtfully, deterministically, and obviously securely is paramount. So, we are very plugged in, whether it's, Ethereum and Pectra, not to get booed here, but just like things like that happen, we engage with very thoughtfully. It does take time to do it right. It takes time to drag all our clients along. And some of our clients are on the forefront and hyper responsive. some are kind of hiding. They sort of quiet and they're slower to move. So as things fork and we do need clients to engage, it does take us time to sort of fully reach out to all our clients. So there's that speed of evolution and agility versus that trade-off of bringing everyone along.
Well, there are risks. It is a thorny part of the Bitcoin system, right? This idea that it is a software system. It's living. We're shipping new software updates. Ryan, I want to talk to you about just this idea of security. Your clients are looking to you, or in some ways, for some measure of security. What is the discussion like with this idea that Bitcoin can adapt, evolve, upgrade, change? How do you have that conversation with clients?
Yeah, so majority of our clients are financial advisors, RIAs, family offices, large institutional investors who want exposure to Bitcoin or are starting to learn that they should have exposure to Bitcoin, but they don't want to custody it themselves. And so they rely on an asset manager like Bitwise to safely custody the crypto assets. We don't do that ourselves. We outsource to custodians like Coinbase and rely on them and work with them to manage our risk from that perspective. But one thing that may not surprise the people here is that most of the investors that we're facing off with don't think about the long-term roadmap of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Most of them, they just realize this is a new technology. This is going to have a huge impact on the world. And we should, for the ones that understand it, we should have some exposure to that in our portfolios. But what I have seen over the past 4 or 5 years at Bitwise is that there used to be maybe one person in each of these offices we would go to who was deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and they were generally younger, trying to convince the older shot callers to explore Bitcoin. And now, fast forward to today, what I find really exciting is that now you go into those meetings, there's probably 3 or 4 people that are deep down into Bitcoin. They go to conferences and events like these. They go to the bigger Bitcoin conferences, and it's less of a battle to have a discussion about Bitcoin in the room. And I think we'll continue to see movement along the spectrum of investors to start caring more about the long-term roadmap of Bitcoin and understanding of its evolution as a software and technology platform.
Rob, over to you. The same question. This idea: how do you talk to clients, and are clients aware of this? Obviously, your product is a bit more technical, so maybe there is more awareness there.
Yeah, I would say our user base, our customers, are definitely more technically aware, but it still comes up in conversation for. I'm speaking at this conference. I talk about like the art of the future of how Bitcoin could change, and they want to understand and know that, okay, so if a fork does happen, what happens to my coins, right? And that's always a little bit of an interesting conversation. If the beauty of Bitcoin as a software system is one of the implications of how Bitcoin's blockchain works is if a fork happens, you own both sides of the fork if you hold your keys and you're managing it before the fork happens, right? So you almost get like a free option call on what path do you want to pursue down the line, right? And I think that gives a lot of people peace of mind in understanding that if I'm working with someone, that it's not like you have to make a decision right away, right? Some people may want to exercise a decision right away, and the way that our stuff works, I've talked to customers about if a fork were to be coming, I'd be able to add front end facing on. Do you want to just sit and wait? Do you want to pick a fork? Like, being able to relay on both chains. A little technical probably for the discussion now but making sure there's relay protection so you can't get spent on both chains. We saw that with Bitcoin Cash in 2017. But those customers are definitely aware, and at least they know that if they're holding keys and they're managing this stuff or working with a partner who's working with them, they can exercise both sides.
Well, Rick, I know you have some clients and customers who are amongst the largest governments in the world, largest financial institutions. What's that conversation like in your position?
It's sort of unexpected. Sort of, if you go back 2 years, 1 year, to suddenly be in DC here and having conversations about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Did not see that one coming. So
it's here.
It's conversations here. So seeing that level of engagement, we've always had engagements, public knowledge about various government agencies that do trade through us or custody through us. And so we've had that engagement. They're slow moving. To go through an RFP for a government agency, it's 1,000 pages. It's a very long, protracted process. It's not fun. No. We have a 20-odd person team that just does RFPs.
Oh, wow.
But that's what it takes. And a lot of the business deals that we close, our head of sales is always like, we've been working on this one for 4 or 5 years, and we finally got it through. So they're very slow moving. And now we're trying to do what I sort of said earlier is awkward for us, is things that normally move slowly are now trying to move very quickly. So how does a government sort of move at the speed of crypto? That's cognitive dissonance there. That doesn't happen. So we have to overcome that. And as we hear, there are a lot of people on Congress who, some of them could easily be here today, that are either themselves or through people on their staff are very forward thinking, very deep in the weeds. And so it's sort of remarkable, at least in my limited experience working with them, just how knowledgeable they are. So it's been sort of surprising to the upside.
Ryan, I want to go over to you and also talk about past experiences. Rob alluded to this idea that Bitcoin has forked in the past. This isn't something that is new. Maybe we haven't seen it so recently. Maybe it's been a while since Taproot, and we've seen contentious forks and things like that. How do you look to this past experience of what has happened in Bitcoin with forks, and how does that inform the thinking over at Bitwise?
Yeah, so luckily we've been around since 2017, and our team has gone through this before. Our clients just look to us to follow the path that we think's best. Typically, we've had success doing that, and part of what I'm trying to do in building out our research team is have more boots on the ground when it comes to a hard fork, soft fork, so that we can begin. Is that
something you're actively preparing for, or is that part of the conversation, the culture? Or?
It's not part of the conversation we're having with clients, because most of the people that we speak to don't know what a hard fork or what that term even means.
Right.
But it's something we think about as we operate the business, and we want to be prepared for, and why we work with partners like Coinbase and other custodians who, we tend to outsource the technical side of those things for. And focus more on spreading Bitcoin adoption from an investment perspective.
Rob, I guess the topic here is, risks, learnings, as you apply and think about your business. You mentioned replay protection, this idea that we'll have an event of fork, potentially different assets. Obviously that's maybe a fringe scenario, but how do you look at the past history of Bitcoin and what you're building with an insurance product that is securing people's coins?
Yeah, I guess it's also just important to caveat that, more often than not when Bitcoin upgrades, there isn't a fork, right? We only had that in 2017 where there was a long sustained fork. So there's a very much of a happy path where you have something like in Taproot, which was in November of 2021, where everything went the happy path, right? So you don't necessarily always have to go through that. But I think it's important when you're thinking about helping manage other people's Bitcoin is having those disasters and contingencies in place, right? It's something I've put a decent amount of thought into on the technical architecture, from just the software side of how do we offer that best kind of quality of life to customers. Having personally in 2017, making sure I was moving my own personal coins correctly, so I wasn't going to do anything wrong. Definitely is a lived experience of going through that. I think at the best part, though, you're able to kind of automate and curate that. You have subject matter experts who are able to make it a white glove, seamless thing, so that the end customer doesn't need to worry about these things, because that's part of the service that they're paying for, right? Is they're right. trusting
you to know.
They're trusting us to understand how to technically execute and architect it correctly. And I think that just goes a long way in just the user experience and the fundamental security, making sure it's being done correctly.
Rick, obviously Coinbase, one of the oldest institutions in the space, kind of has lived through some of these formative forks and network upgrades, disruptions, however you want to look at it. How do you think through this past experience as you approach custody problems today?
Yeah, so from our perspective, us as an institutional custodian, we have lots of clients who are sort of very, crypto forward. And they're sort of the easy ones. I mean, they're hard in other levels, but in this context, they know what's going on. They don't need education. They don't need outreach. They don't need hand-holding. They just need us to do our job and do it well, have the proper security and proper technology. And that's sort of the more complex bits, but it's the easier part. The issue we have is we have a lot of clients who are less sophisticated that need a lot of hand-holding. So they need all the complications obfuscated. They don't want to look at wallets. They just want to look at balances. There's some wonky things where if there's a fork and an asset is generated and I'm an SEC regulated entity and I'm only allowed to hold asset A and suddenly there's asset B in my account, that's a problem. So we need a solution for that. So we're tackling these esoteric non-technical workflow commercial problems. At least I said on my end where I'm working, we have other people in the firm that sort of are more in the technical weeds. But like that's a strange problem to have. Like most of us be like, oh, cool, I got a new asset.
Free coin.
But like if you're an ETF, like you're not allowed to have that new asset. That's suddenly, it's like an automatic dust attack. It's like that's a problem.
Well, I did want to talk about the ETFs because this is something new in the space, right? They're, I think, a year old. They're coming up on a year, maybe, in terms of, the development. But this adds a layer of complication, right? We now have, or I guess, how does it change the complexity of these types of situations?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they're just over a year old, launched in January 2024. I think one of the things that we saw happen in the first days of launching these ETFs, because Bitwise published our address that we hold the Bitcoin on behalf of investors in, is we were getting dusted with a bunch of Bitcoin, and it was not something that we had gone through before, and that the ETF world had gone through before. It's a completely new concept for ETFs, and so it was interesting to try to navigate that, come up with protocols and guidance in place for what to do with those assets. Can we distribute it? Can we liquidate them?
What was done? Where did you net out on that?
I believe what we ended up doing is working with Coinbase, who's the custodian for that ETF, and could restrict assets that were coming in from certain addresses or whitelist certain addresses, so that only Bitcoin coming from those addresses was put into the fund's holdings, and then kind of block other ones, because you have bad actors as well trying to send sanctioned crypto through sanctioned addresses to try to mess with us or Larry Fink and BlackRock or whoever it is. So it just created an entirely new world to navigate. And I think it's great that we're pushing the bounds of what traditional finance can do, what ETFs can do. They're one of the biggest ways that investors get exposure to any type of asset class. And so, my view, the transparency of the Bitcoin ETFs is really fascinating, and will push the envelope and push traditional finance to a more transparent ecosystem in the long run.
Rob, I guess the question here is ETFs. We now have these solutions that allow us to scale custody in some ways by removing custody. How do you think through how that has impacted maybe what we can do with Bitcoin on the technical side?
On the technical side, for the ETFs, you definitely have this sense now of the stakeholders you would traditionally view in Bitcoin are people who are running nodes and holding keys, but now you have this layer of abstraction on top of it, right? I sometimes glibly say custodians are layer 2, right? If I move from one, it's not a technical layer 2 in the sense that it's actually atomically and trustlessly executing something, but it's a way of aggregating activity off chain. Right. And I think just to tie it back to a little bit, there's also a philosophical discussion. When a fork happens and you're only allowed to hold asset A, whatever it is, each side of the fork is going to say they are the real asset A. Right. So there's a funny philosophical discussion that even exists outside of the technical side of it. But I think it definitely causes different camps of people who don't, they bought Bitcoin for this digital store gold narrative. They hold it in their brokerage account as an ETF. And now you have multiple counterparties, right? You have Bitwise, which is maybe holding a Coinbase, right? So you have multiple layers removed from the end user with the economic exposure to Bitcoin versus we traditionally call those economic nodes, businesses that are processing transactions and running the code, validating blocks that are coming in. And you almost those coalitions get bigger. And I think it's just an interesting time in thinking about as Bitcoin changes. One of my personal missions is making it more accessible for people in general to be able to safely store their Bitcoin. And I think that's an open discussion around if you add vaulting and you add these other functionalities, does that lower the friction so someone can actually hold it themselves or have greater mitigations, or maybe even having custodians being co-participants in that, right? That's kind of how our model works, where the customer has to sign and we have to sign. So it kind of it's leveraging this Bitcoin as this programmable money to kind of shift that paradigm of this is not just a bar of gold sitting in a vault somewhere, that you can actually kind of leverage the best of all worlds in a way that maybe can distribute that economic power a bit more.
Well, Rick, we're talking about ETF issuers here. Obviously, a lot of experience. I guess, how do you think through that element of this? Is it really that different, these kind of risk or education hours in the world of ETFs? This idea that some of these edge cases can happen where there are custody concerns. Is it really that different from what these ETF providers are used to?
I think so.
I guess you can't fork gold, right? You're not going to.
Yeah, no. And even so, the words we use,
But stocks can split, maybe, right?
Stocks can split. There can be corporate actions. There could be a spinoff. Like things like there are analogies we use, which are great because it helps take the imagination of people that are sort of way deep in TradFi or not really deep in anything, but it can help bridge them. And we like to serve as a bridge from TradFi to NewFi. And we do that. And we say things like custody. And I was having a conversation earlier with some folks, like we say custody and people think of like old school custody. You drop a silver or gold bar off at a bank and they put it in the vault. And the bank now has 100% accountability for that. They are the sole custodian of that bar. Something happens to it, the bank screwed up. Whereas in our world of digital custody, the client it's not quite joint custody, but like the client has some co-responsibilities here. There's hygiene, maintenance of passwords, maintenance of employees, and you're not the only layer of security, but you're one of many that protects things. So so we say the same words, but we use them slightly differently. And just along the ETF space, there are things that are changing. One of the fun conversations we had early on, perhaps 2 years ago, with one of the large ETF providers, and we were sort of showing them like what it's like in the systems and things were familiar. And they're like, well, end of day reports. Like, what do you give us end of day? And we're like, end of day? They're like, was it 4 o'clock like equities or is it at 5 o'clock like FX? They're like
you're like, we're up all night.
There is no end of day. They're like, but you stop trading on weekends. Literally verbatim conversation. They're like, no. And like they started melting and crying, like it's not gonna be horrible. And then we talked them off the ledge, and then we don't have to trade on weekends. Like, oh, okay, good. And then they're like, we got to a page that looked familiar, like PDF downloads, exports, CSV, the usual boring technology that people come to work with. Like, oh, great. You mean our fund administrator can get a read-only API and download all our stuff? They're like, oh yeah. They're like, oh, that's great. That I get. That's like so that gave them comfort. But then I said, well, but you can fire your fund administrator because you can do it in real time because it's on like a blockchain. And then they melted again. So so there are things that bridge and are similar, but some of those bridges are sort of faux. They sort of take people to the wrong mental place. But it's still a journey. But there's some nuances that haven't quite sort of bled into sort of everyone. Some yes, but some not quite there.
Well, in the spirit of our sponsors here, we've got this lovely OPCAT Taproot Wizard back here. I do want to discuss some of the aspects of custodianship, and you can have changes to Bitcoin without forks, right? So we saw this with ordinals and the sort of Bitcoin assets like runes and token protocols, right? There was no fork that created these. These were just technical meta protocols that were launched on top of Bitcoin and found some success. But now there's additional custody implications where exchanges maybe not used to custodying single UTXOs or thinking through that. So Ryan, I guess, how do you look at these changes that happen on Bitcoin are not even related to upgrades or forks, but then maybe impact what you do or not? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to, as was mentioned earlier, there's so many elements of how these funds and products are regulated, and there's so much restriction on what it can and can't do that, I mean, these RFP documents, they're 1,000 pages long. If you look at one of the fund prospectuses for any of these ETFs, it's hundreds of pages long, and it's a lot of legal talk. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that on the one hand, we are taking the right approach as it relates to the Bitcoin network and as it relates to investors, but also on the other hand, making sure we're not getting into hot water with regulators, which ultimately impacts our long-term business and impacts the view of Bitcoin for investors that aren't as boots on the ground. So it's tough. It's a balance that you have to manage. It does stifle a bit of innovation on the fund administration side or the issuer side because you are beholden to some kind of legal requirements or regulatory framework. But I think what we want to do at Bitwise is just continue to be as far on the as much on the forefront of being able to experiment and adopt new technologies and these kinds of changes. But it's tough. It's often you feel like you're being held back from what would be more fun and more exciting to look into.
Well, Rob, I'll just maybe say it a little differently. Casey Rodemark gets the idea one day that he just wants to number all the sats, right? He just wants to number them numerically, releases the protocol that numbers them, and all of a sudden you're holding maybe a different asset for your clients or a rare sat that you didn't have before, and that just happens, right? That just happens spontaneously. That would occur. So, how do you think through that as a custodian?
So, I mean, thinking through it process-wise, like. With there's many tech adoption cycles. At first, it's like really niche and power users, like being around when Ordinals launched, the amount of people who reached out to me who I knew were in Bitcoin for a very long time, but were asking me, how do I set up my Bitcoin conf file so I can actually index everything so I could do all this? And I was like, interesting, right? I have a bunch of people who are in the Bitcoin ecosystem and now they're concerned about their conf file. Never seen that before. And then like you have this like staggering stage of, it was very initially janky. Casey just kind of, as he would say, ripped it and shipped it. And the tooling around supporting that infrastructure was really lacking. And I think there's a bit of a time where more application devs, the first movers come in, they build products and services, and they get success, and then they usually give back to open source code to make it more usable. And you have a bit of a flywheel till you get to a point where us as a business, where it's no longer a bunch of like paper clips and bubble gum trying to support ordinals. Like you have better infrastructure for that. For us, I mean, the basic primitives of, we already support things like coin control, UTXO selection, which directionally supports all of the ordinal theory. We don't support all of the bespoke like individual labeling and numbering and kind of visualizing that. But I think it's listening to customers' demand and their interest in it, and letting them be able to have the access of fidelity that they want, so that if they want to go off on their own as a power user, they're still empowered to do that without encumbering our team to have to, offer this full feature suite for some customers that maybe want it and some others don't even care about it, right? So, as a small team, just trying to rank order, prioritize what's going to help us get new customers, make our existing customers happy, it just gets slotted in there.
Rick, I know that the exchange model is, it's based on this kind of idea of omnibus accounts, right? You're just kind of keeping enough balance in the exchange to satisfy client demand. How do you think through this idea that the nature of the asset in custody could change in some of these cases, and all of a sudden you are holding some sort of rare SAT or some sort of NFT linked Bitcoin that might be something that a client wants? Is that something you think about?
So I'll tell an odd anecdote to sort of give a sense of it. So in general, omnibus structure, it's very different. People buy Bitcoin, they don't select the UTXOs when they buy them traditionally. However, with our institutional offering, we do have an omnibus. And we found people, because we're nice and generous, we pay for gas for a lot of our clients' transactions. It's just part of the facilitation, obviously. It's part of the larger service. We found clients abusing us savagely. Not in a nice way. A little UTXO, rare Satoshi mining, with us paying the gas.
Right, yeah.
And they were surprised when suddenly we gave them the bill for their gas or turned them off and exited them. So it opens us up to interesting. So we have to have a bit of a shrewder game, like more of our A game, because these things come up. We do a lot of things to enable our clients. We view this as it's our job. These are people, our partners. They're not all in the partnership mindset. Some of them are very mercenary and opportunistic. And if we take our eye off things, they will take all the money we let them take. So but as these things do evolve, we do need to be aware, stay on top, and just make sure that we're happy to enable people to do things. But you want to go for rare sats in our omnibus, go for it, but you're paying your own gas.
Well, speaking of keeping things secure and safe, Sean was here earlier talking about some of the vaulting kind of proposals that really directly relate to custody. Some of them are a few years old. Some of them are active, and we're discussing activation paths for things like OPCTV, which potentially could encumber UTXOs and kind of maybe provide custody models. How are you engaging with these specific proposals? Are you engaging with these specific proposals as things that could help your business? Ryan, over to you.
I think we do view it as part of our responsibility to at least be educated on what's going on. We are probably, if the custodians are a layer 2, we're probably a layer 3 away from all of that, and so we like to try to do that through just supporting open source developers and Bitcoin developers through our donation of the profits from the ETF. And Hong Kim, who's our CTO and co-founder, is very deep in the technical weeds of Bitcoin and leads those efforts for us. And it's something that as our team grows, we're dedicating more and more resources to it. So I see 5 years from now, we're much more involved in those conversations than we are today. And I think part of those first steps is coming to events like this and having boots on the ground and digesting what's going on, and then eventually hopefully having a voice in that.
Rob, the question is, OPCTV and OpVault, are these proposals you're actively looking at? Could they help your business if they weren't enacted?
Definitely yes, in the sense that being able to have pre-signed transactions with CTV and reactive security with OpVault, just empirically, it's a tool of risk mitigation, right? So when we're dealing with insurance, it's in the bucket of risk management. We do risk transferring, right? You buy an insurance contract, but then also a lot of how we offer our services is doing many kinds of different risk mitigation. I mentioned earlier, we do this with our kind of a bespoke, like on-chain smart contracts that actually distribute keys using time locks and many ways to recover the funds. That empirically lowers risk. If you had an ability to reactively say, wait, I didn't authorize that withdrawal, and it has to sit there on chain for everyone to look at, being able to claw that back provides a feedback loop. I think honestly, it's less so the technical elements at this point, and it's the user experience, which is actually the hardest part. We found that when we integrated a lot of the stuff with Miniscript, technically, like I'd be on my command line, I'm like, hey, technically it works. And my co-founder, Becca, would be like, okay, but normal people are going to use this, Rob. So we need to make this look really pretty, right? And I think that's an important balance when you're thinking through, like, you're enabling these new features. It definitely lowers the risk. I've messed around a little bit with the high level tooling of it. And I think things that one, socially just signaling like I'm interested in these things, they would help my business run better. It would lower risk. It would make it cheaper for customers because you're lowering risk, is like the first bucket of that. And then on our own team, technically, we have devs that have tinkered around a little bit. And I think messing around with Sapio Miniscript, which uses CTV, James O'Byrne has done a lot of like open source code for the OpVault stuff. Probably focusing more on the CTV stuff, just because that's what's more in the activation circle right now. But there's a CTV only implementation of doing basic vaults. So it's all things that are just incrementally some tooling out there. We may have to open up some tools ourselves to show how we're doing this as a good steward, because once it's out in consensus, anyone can do it. And so you really can't have like, this is my secret sauce on how to keep the money safe. So I think maybe like putting your time and effort where your mouth is and showing like, hey, this is how you could actually construct and do this is a great way to kind of like increase interest in the ecosystem.
Well, the historical analog here, obviously, too, is that custody on Bitcoin natively has improved, right? We have multi-sig now. That was something that originally in the early Bitcoin protocols was difficult. That was kind of unlocked by a technical innovation. But Rick, bringing you to the conversation here about OpCTV, OpVault, this idea that Bitcoin can improve the native custody at the protocol level, is that something that is interesting to your business? Are you following these proposals?
So me personally, this is technically beyond my depth, if I'm just candid. I'm sort of in a sort of different level of weeds trying to activate the ETFs for things like staking and such. But we do have protocol specialists, obviously, Coinbase. We have lots of degens that are heavily involved in the protocols themselves. But just to give an example of sort of how I get engaged and sort of where this hits me, my first interaction with Hong was almost exactly a year ago when the call came in. It's like, you don't support Taproot? And I'm just like, and so then I went to my folks. I'm like, guys, like, how do we miss this? And they're like, we didn't. But I'm like, it's 3 months of work. Like, how do we, like, we started 3 months ago. Like, oh, so it's like, it'll come out in 3 weeks. Just, pretend like we did magic and 3 months of work in 3 weeks. So to my earlier point, things do take us time because you want us to be methodical and test freaking everything. And so we do. So we had that on tap. That was because we had outreach to clients. We have the people in-house that do that. In terms of, again, I was taking notes during the presentation. So I have some homework to go ahead and Google some things. I already had some of my colleagues make fun of me on Slack because I was asking them what CTV was. So you can do it too. It's fine. But like, so we do engage. Anything that makes the network more secure so that it can scale is a winning outcome. There's no universe where Coinbase does well and Bitwise doesn't, or Anchorage doesn't. Like, we are a community instead of, there is anything that grows the user base, that gives great use cases, secure use cases is great. Anything that introduces drag, frictions, or, a large hack, bad press. You think the folks in Washington we were referencing earlier, like, had a good day when Bybit had their bad moment. That was bad for all of us. So no, we're very much inclined, very incentivized to see successful security enhancements, things that will reduce friction and democratize access.
Well, as we're winding down, I want to zoom out. Obviously, I think this is a conference about Bitcoin consensus, software upgrades, and just this idea that we all have responsibility. There's different actors in the ecosystem that are seeking to coordinate around software changes. There's a lot of incumbents that are now coming into the space. There's different players who weren't here before. There's governments. There's large banks. There's Mr. Larry Fink and BlackRock who are here now. So I'm curious just for thoughts on the consensus process, right? We've upgraded Bitcoin before. Now we're doing it with some new players at the table. Ryan, over to you in just terms of, do you think the consensus process can change? Can we still upgrade Bitcoin with some of these new players at the table?
Yeah, I think so. I would be surprised if any of the issuers, the BlackRocks of the world, because they do have people, that are very technically sound when it comes to Bitcoin and the roadmap and consensus and all those things. So I'd be very surprised if they came in and tried to block anything. I do think it is very important for the incumbents to do their homework and to support the ecosystem and not to beat a dead horse here on the donations that we make, but like we rely on companies like Brink or we work with CK and the team at the HRF who are really on the front lines of this. And that wasn't something that we had to do, but it's something we chose to do because we felt it was very important. And just like publishing the address of the Bitcoin ETFs, there's no reason any of the other issuers can't do that. We hope that at some point BlackRock does that as well. And so I think just trying to push things forward and
setting a good example. Setting a good example.
Setting a good example and feeling that responsibility and really living it, I think, is what really matters. That's my thoughts on how incumbents should continue to play a role, is they should point resources to the right people and live through the values of the Bitcoin community.
Rob, we're talking about the boogeyman here, the big idea that Larry Fink, the U.S. government, they'll block us from making consensus upgrades, perhaps. Do you think that the rules of the game have changed, the nature of the game has changed?
It's interesting. I tweeted out this morning, if the Bitcoin market cap the day Taproot activated was 1.2 trillion. We're currently at like 1.6 trillion. So we're only like a 30% increase. Some people are like, Bitcoin's so much bigger now. Like it's so much harder. And like there may be more players, but the economic pie is in the rough ballpark of where we were the last time we upgraded a soft fork. And for me, I think that many of these players are going to be sub-brokering out custody arrangements with the staff accounting bulletin 121 being repealed and all these banks being able to call them in now. They don't have a team of protocol engineers like Rick has, right? And no one's going to trust them to spin up overnight their own, like, we're going to, I'm a major bank and I'm here to fix Bitcoin custody. Like I think in the first few years of this all shaking out, they're going to work with your Anchorages, they're going to work with your Coinbases, which is going to ultimately accrete to, relying on those experts to be kind of informed and understanding how this all works. And so for me, I think that it may be a little bit overstated. Let's see what happens in a couple of years, but I think that's a great time to talk about now and activating, in that you have people who've been working on Bitcoin for over 10 years here, who've put a lot of thought and effort into understanding what are the marginal improvements we can do in a safe and controlled way. I'm optimistic in that, it's not like we're going to trust Larry Fink's going to come in and have his team figure out a new way that no one had ever figured out before and how to improve Bitcoin everyone's going to agree to. You need these.
That would be nice.
It'd be great. Like I'm not. Maybe that's a challenge. Like go figure it out. But
if
like
he scales Bitcoin,
it'd be
figures it out.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I mean, for me, I view it as optimistic in that they're going to be working within the existing ecosystem already to be able to kind of facilitate and execute all of this. And so that gives a lot of ability for people who've been here for a long time to kind of, help move the needle forward.
Well, I think the point is that consensus process is hard. It's complicated. Different stakeholders feel differently about it. So Rick, over to you, I guess, in terms of how do you think these new players can adapt? Do they come in with some sort of intent, or do they trust partners?
Well, I think in general they'll trust partners, but I don't think their investment thesis is that this is a static asset. Yes, they might utilize the digital gold concept, but like gold is a bar and it is static. It's an element. It's
so they like the idea that Bitcoin is a software.
But yes, but my point is like they're not investing in it because they think it's a static asset as such. They use that thesis as like a medium of exchange of the future, but they don't view it as necessarily a static thing. So the folks there, like they are deep in the weeds. And they are very thoughtful. And they're very incentivized to do things that help increase the value of the asset that they're fiduciary owners of for their end clients. So they are obligated to do what they deem to be in the best interest of their shareholders, the end investors. So if something can be demonstrated to them, this improves the value of Bitcoin and grows the network, they're quasi compelled to vote that way.
We skipped ahead to my last question a bit, and maybe we'll take some questions after this, but it was just ossification, right? This is what this conference is kind of rebelling against, this idea that Bitcoin will kind of stay locked and checked as it is. That's this perfect, cyber hornet vortex that we don't need to improve. Ryan, how do you think about ossification as it relates to your business in that context?
Yeah, I think, when you think about scaling Bitcoin over the long term, the people in this room are really the ones contributing to the technical scaling of Bitcoin. But I view, for better or worse, Larry Fink's an extremely influential person in traditional finance, one of the most influential thinkers out there. When he gets on CNBC and says that everything will be tokenized, or that investors all around the world are investing in Bitcoin as a flight to quality and a hedge against hyperinflation and systemic risks in the traditional financial ecosystem, that scales the capital side of Bitcoin, which our hope is that ultimately that funnels back into helping scale the roadmap. So I think it's absolutely critical to our business long term that Bitcoin is successful, and keeping it a static asset and fighting change and fighting growth and fighting the technical scaling of it would be counterintuitive to the growth of our business.
Rob, question is ossification. How do you feel about it? Do we need Bitcoin to keep upgrading in your view, or in the company's view? Is that?
I mean, it kind of goes full circle back to the start of the conversation where, like, as a small engineering team, I can't lay out, it's too much risk for me to assume that something's going to happen. So I have more than enough. I have years of work I can do that's just within the existing Bitcoin consensus, right? I'm optimistic though, and I think that for ossification, I just think personally, I'm opposed to in principle because to me, it just doesn't structurally make sense that you have a software system and now you have this divine moment of now it's perfect. At this moment, Taproot had to be the last thing, and now nothing else ever happens again. And I think that's position softened a lot. And even people who are, maybe they would call it team slow and steady, that isn't their position. So I don't want to straw man it. I've made this point before. I just think that if you're able to increase the scale in which people are able to use their Bitcoin as programmable money by putting a couple extra bytes on chain, you can do all these really cool things and really streamline operations for businesses and being able to offer better security to end users. That's something we should all be striving and working towards, right? And I think it just kind of goes to, we activated time locks. Time locks are incredibly valuable. We needed that for Lightning. We added 2 different time locks for Lightning and SegWit to be able to enable the Lightning network. So you almost never have this like counter positive of what happens if we never added SegWit, then we wouldn't have the Lightning network, right? Like you could have made the same exact arguments you're making today about ossification back then, and you can have been like, well, it's perfect now. We don't want to change it. So it's something that I'm always mindful of. And I think, conferences like this and conversations that are being had, and I think the next step from Jeremy's talk earlier is getting people actually putting out real demos, touching and using this stuff. So it's less abstract and theoretical. I think that's incumbent on application devs in the ecosystem to start kind of championing it forward. If they want to see this change, they should be putting out some examples to make it less ephemeral and whiteboards and more real.
I guess if you want to add anything, Rick, the question is, what if Bitcoin doesn't change? What if it doesn't upgrade?
That's a failure mode. I mean, we're all here because this is sort of the dynamic future. I spent 3 decades in TradFi, and I can honestly say, yes, I, saw computers take things over, and some jobs went away, and trading floors shifted and grew and then shrunk again. But things really didn't change. There was no true transformation that happened. If we are static and done here with Bitcoin, we failed. Until my daughters are saying, "Hey, Dad, can you send me some Bitcoin?" And I said, "I need to buy something." When that happens, then maybe we'll take a vacation or an ossification moment, but not until then.
Strong words. All right, we'll open up the floor for questions. I guess I got a mic. Oh, you got it? Okay.
So large custody clients are often very concerned about the rules for asset managers and things like that the SEC uses to govern the custody of securities. Bitcoin's a very different thing. We've seen with multi-sig, some large custody clients start kind of pushing back against omnibus accounts and start trying to say, can we see some on-chain interaction that reflects our custody agreements? But it's still relatively rare. As we're developing better custody technology like OpCTV and CheckSig from SAC and maybe OpCat and other things, how do we educate the family offices, the fund managers, all these others on how custodians can protect them against the custodian making bad decisions and can protect them against the custodian getting hacked using technical means and not just, the SEC's custody rule?
I'll jump in there with this so we could talk all day on that topic. So at Coinbase, we offer both segregated on-chain vaults for our clients that many clients avail themselves of, and hence they can share out their addresses. We also offer omnibus structures, both outside of our QC and now within our QC. So having an omnibus within the QC, like the silly whale alerts we get, I hate those, right? That's a feature, a defect of having very public addresses. Within an omnibus, you don't have that. So there is value to having an omnibus structure, legally separated, operationally commingled, LSOC for our SEC friends. We do that. There's value, but I see your point on Vault. So we offer both. Clients self-select, and we're not here to tell them how to behave. We're here to provide solutions. Some of them, especially those that trade with higher frequency or larger size that would rather not have the whale alerts go out, the omnibus structure solves the safe harbor RIA rules and lets them do that. Others just trade into Vault. So, we're able to enable both.
Just briefly to add to that, the way we executed like our business relationship with a customer is you have an insurance policy from Lloyd's of London, and on that is your name and your information as well as your Vault. So you can take that Vault metadata, you can load that into Bitcoin Core. You can even check it yourself. I've gotten on multiple calls with customers to kind of like walk through, here's how your test transaction worked. I can walk through it step by step based on their level of interest and curiosity or care to attention. And I can actually show like, no, this is why you can diagram this out. This is exactly how it works. You can use your own software to look at the transaction history to generate deposit addresses, which the nature of our Vault is a distribution of risk. So as of today, we don't have an omnibus product. There's things that we're working on that would probably fall closer into that bucket. But each customer, since the risk is distributed, they each have their own bespoke Vault. And I'm able to walk through with them and explain, this is how your rules work. And you can use your own software to look at that, do all your deposit addresses. And it's still in a way where we are required to participate in the Vault for the length of the insurance contract. When the insurance contract expires, though, it goes back to just your keys. Right. And so that's something that we natively settle on chain with our smart contracts. And I explain to them, like, this is how, if we cease to exist or you don't want to do business with us anymore, at the end of your time lock, which is using a calendar date time, right? Because it's dated to an insurance contract, we're able to actually layer that in there. And this is how you would go and remove the funds yourself, right? So being able to explain that for the more technical users who are interested in learning all those mechanics, this is, I guess, the beauty of being a startup. I just hop on the call with them and walk through the script stack on mempool space.
Questions? Custody.
Yes. So, some custodians are Bitcoin only. Others are they do multiple coins. And what you sometimes see when custodians have multiple coins is that they want some infrastructure, some device that does all the coins. But it means that they can take advantage of some of the more sophisticated features in each specific coin. So like a system that works for both Bitcoin and Ethereum can't use Taproot's multi-sig capabilities, or maybe it could. And so would that make a company less interested in future soft forks to Bitcoin because they can't take advantage of them? Or are they saying, well, we don't take advantage of them now, but maybe we do in the future, so we do actually care about this?
I mean, my example earlier, if a client cares and they call me, I care. So, we, as adoption grows, we will lean into these things. We support 400 and some odd assets on our custodial platform. We sometimes delist them. We have a whole process for this. We add as we can. So there are all rules around that. As our clients demand it, we add assets. There are some tens of millions of assets. Some are tokens, some are commodities, some are securities, some are stable coins. Hopefully we'll get clarification on which one fits where from a legal regulatory perspective. But we sort of are inclined to have to support everything. I do agree that going super deep and super specialized generates a lot of value. Protocol specialists dig in, they find great things, they surface them, and we adopt them. So we do look to adopt things that sort of help the community and help our clients.
We can do one more. This gentleman over here.
I found it really interesting you mentioning the dusting attacks, the possibility for forked coins, as well as the mention of, okay, let's say Larry Fink decides to block some kind of consensus change that we might want to make. Do you think that those things point to any kind of fundamental incompatibility between the permissionless nature of Bitcoin and the current regulatory environment? And if so, do you see ways that regulatory environment could evolve to support these things?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at it. I think what we're seeing in DC, that our team, we have a few people that spend a lot of time in DC, and what we're seeing, what we're really excited about is that whether it's the SEC or the CFTC or another regulatory agency or even legislators, they really are turning a corner when it comes to learning about and understanding this technology. And I think what that means is that we will have regulations that are permissionless friendly and significantly more than they have been under the Gensler and Biden era administrations. And so I think that this technology pushes the bounds of what we've done before, but I think that will push the bounds of what we've done before from a regulatory and legislative perspective. And I'm optimistic that through the interactions that we have with DC, that the regulators and the lawmakers aren't going to stifle that permissionlessness of what this technology brings and are actually going to embrace it to a certain extent. At least I'm hopeful of that.
And also add that, I met with a congressman recently who was sort of complaining about, I had 400 Bitcoin amount Gox and now I just have 6, and but they have skin in the game. And so I think they're more inclined to see things succeed than you might think. But I think it's an excellent question between the battle between permissionlessness and bureaucracy. But I think that'll play out quite interestingly. But I'm hopeful.
Sweet. Thanks for your time. This has been the Custody panel.
Awesome.